You might want to check your bag, ma'am. The words landed soft, almost polite, but the way the officer's hand hovered near the zipper said everything else. Alicia Carter didn't move right away. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold wash across the polished tile floor, reflecting in the glossy black of her shoes. Around her, the convenience store had gone quiet in that strange, unnatural way, like sound itself had stepped back to watch what would happen next. A man near the coffee machine froze mid-pour. A cashier stopped scanning, her fingers suspended above the register. And then, slowly, Alicia exhaled, steady and controlled, before reaching for the worn leather strap of her bag. She felt the weight of eyes before she even unzipped it. She didn't rush, didn't tremble, just opened it like she had done 1,000 times before, calm and precise, as if this moment had already happened somewhere else. The officer leaned in slightly, peering down, his radio crackling softly at his shoulder. "Go ahead," he said, quieter now. Alicia turned the bag toward him, and that's when it happened. A small plastic package slipped from the inner pocket and dropped onto the floor with a dull, unmistakable sound. It didn't bounce. It just sat there. Heavy. Final. The air tightened. Someone behind her let out a short, sharp breath. The officer's posture changed instantly, his hand lowering toward his belt, not aggressive, just prepared. "Ma'am," he said, voice firmer now. "I'm going to need you to step aside." Alicia's gaze dropped briefly to the package, then lifted again, not to the officer, but past him. Her eyes locked onto a figure standing near the glass door. Ryan Whitmore. He didn't look away. He stood there in his tailored jacket, one hand casually tucked into his pocket, the other holding his phone like he'd been expecting this exact moment. His expression wasn't shock. It wasn't even concern. It was something quieter, controlled, like someone watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. When their eyes met, he gave the slightest tilt of his head. Not a nod, not a smile, just acknowledgement. Alicia held his gaze for a fraction longer than expected, then shifted her attention back to the officer. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice even, almost detached. The officer crouched, carefully picking up the package with a gloved hand, inspecting it. Without opening it. "We're going to sort this out," he replied. "But right now, I need you to come with me." The words echoed faintly against the glass refrigerators lining the wall, humming quietly behind them. Alicia nodded once. No argument. No protest. Just compliance. But as she turned, something about her didn't match the scene. Not the way her shoulders stayed relaxed. Not the way her breathing never changed. And definitely not the way her eyes flicked, just once, toward the small black dome of a security camera mounted in the corner above the door. Ryan followed her movement, just briefly, then looked away, adjusting his cuff like the moment no longer concerned him. Outside, the faint red and blue reflections of a patrol car stretched across the glass, bending with every passing second. Inside, Alicia stepped forward, hands visible, calm as ever. And for a moment, just before the officer guided her toward the exit, she allowed herself the smallest pause, barely noticeable, like she was waiting for something unseen to catch up. The back door of the patrol car opened with a dull click, and Alicia lowered herself into the seat without hesitation, the vinyl cold against her hands as she settled in. The faint scent of disinfectant lingering in the air, like something that never quite faded, the kind of smell that clung to places where people were always passing through but never staying. And as the door shut behind her, the outside noise muted instantly, replaced by the low hum of the engine and the soft crackle of the radio mounted at the front, voices overlapping in codes and fragments that meant everything to someone and nothing to anyone else. And for a moment, the world felt smaller, contained, like everything that mattered had been reduced to the space between the metal frame and the tinted glass. And still, Alicia did not rush her breathing, did not tighten her shoulders. She simply sat there, hands resting lightly on her knees, eyes forward, calm in a way that did not match the situation, not even a little. While outside, Ryan Whitmore stepped onto the sidewalk, his shoes clicking softly against the concrete, his reflection stretching across the side of the patrol car as he passed. And he did not look at her directly this time. Not fully, just a glance, quick and measured, like checking a detail on a checklist, before turning his attention to his phone, thumb moving across the screen with practiced ease. And then he walked away, just like that, as if whatever had just happened behind him no longer required his presence, as if the outcome had already been decided long before anyone else realized there was even a game being played. And inside the car, Alicia watched his reflection disappear in the curved edge of the glass, her gaze steady, unblinking, until there was nothing left to see. And only then did she shift slightly, leaning back into the seat, her fingers brushing once against the seam of her jacket, subtle, almost absent-minded, but deliberate enough to matter. While in the front seat, the officer adjusted the rear-view mirror, catching her eyes for just a second, his expression unreadable, not accusing, not sympathetic, just observant, like he was trying to place something that did not quite fit. "You have anything you want to say before we get downtown?" he asked. His tone even, procedural, but quieter than before, as if the weight of the situation had settled into something more complicated than a routine stop. Alicia tilted her head just slightly, considering the question, not because she needed time to think, but because she chose to take it. "I think you already have everything you need," she said, her voice low, steady, carrying no edge, no urgency. Just a statement placed carefully into the space between them, and the officer frowned faintly, glancing back at her again through the mirror. "That's so?" he replied, and for a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal as the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the slow evening traffic, red brake lights stretching ahead like a chain of glowing beads, and Alicia's gaze drifted toward the side window, watching the city slide past in reflections and fragments, storefronts bending into streaks of color, streetlights flickering on one by one as the sky deepened into dusk, and then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not wide, not obvious, just the smallest shift at the corner of her mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared, because somewhere, not far from where they were now, a phone had just buzzed, a call had just connected, and a voice on the other end had said, "We got movement," while inside the patrol car, the officers' radio crackled again, a new voice cutting through the static, sharper this time, more focused. "Unit 12, confirm you have the female suspect in custody." And the officer reached for the mic, pressing the button with his thumb. "Affirmative," he said, his eyes flicking once more to the mirror, lingering a fraction longer now. "We are en route." And Alicia closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, as if syncing her thoughts with something unseen, something unfolding beyond the narrow frame of the car, something already in motion long before the plastic package ever touched the floor. And when she opened them again, the calm was still there, unchanged, unshaken, like she was not being taken somewhere uncertain, but exactly where she needed to be, like every step, every glance, every second of silence had been accounted for, measured out, and placed into position with quiet precision. And as the city lights flickered across her face in passing reflections, one thing became increasingly clear, though no one in that car had said it out loud yet. The story they thought they were telling was not the one that was actually happening, not even close. The patrol car slowed as it turned into the narrow driveway behind the precinct, the tires crunching softly over loose gravel before stopping under a harsh overhead light that flickered just slightly, casting uneven shadows across the concrete walls. And for a brief moment, nothing moved, the engine idling low, the radio silent now as if even it had decided to wait. And Alicia remained exactly as she had been the entire ride, still, composed, her gaze forward, while the officer exhaled through his nose and reached for the door handle, stepping out first before circling around, the back door opening again with that same dull mechanical click. "All right, ma'am," he said, not unkindly, just firm. "Let us go inside." And Alicia stepped out, her shoes meeting the ground with a quiet, measured sound, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands visible, her expression unreadable in the cold white light. And as they walked toward the back entrance, the building loomed in front of them. Plain brick, narrow windows, the kind of place that did not try to impress anyone. It just existed, solid and indifferent, and inside, the air shifted immediately, cooler, heavier, carrying the faint scent of paper, metal, and something older, something that had settled into the walls over years of voices, questions, and waiting. And Alicia's eyes moved once across the room, taking in the details without lingering, the scuffed floor tiles, the row of plastic chairs, The bulletin board cluttered with notices no one seemed to read, and then she was guided toward a small desk where another officer sat, typing slowly, his fingers pausing as they approached, his gaze lifting to meet hers. And there was a flicker there, subtle but present, not recognition exactly, but something close, like a memory trying to surface and not quite making it. "This is her," the first officer said, placing the small evidence bag on the desk, the plastic crinkling softly, "found in her possession," and the second officer nodded, reaching for the bag, turning it slightly under the light, examining it without opening it, his brow tightening just a fraction. "You searched the bag yourself?" he asked, and the first officer hesitated, just briefly. "It was opened in front of me," he replied. Item fell out, and the second officer glanced up again, his eyes moving between Alicia and the bag, something about the sequence not fully settling in his mind. And Alicia stood there, quiet, her breathing even, her hands resting lightly at her sides, not defensive, not tense, just present. And after a moment, the second officer leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her more carefully now. "You understand what you are being brought in for?" he asked, his tone measured, almost conversational, and Alicia met his gaze directly. "I understand what it looks like," she said, her voice steady, each word placed with precision, and the officer held her gaze for a second longer than expected, then nodded slowly, like he was acknowledging something he could not yet define. "We are going to need to process you," he said, reaching for a form on his desk, sliding it closer. "Standard procedure." And Alicia inclined her head once. No resistance, no hesitation, just acceptance. But as the pen scratched lightly across the paper, filling in her name, Alicia Carter, the letters forming clean and deliberate, something shifted again, small, almost invisible, the second officer's eyes pausing on the name for just a fraction too long, like it meant something, like it connected to something just out of reach. And in the background, a phone rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet, another officer answering it quickly, his voice low, urgent, turning slightly away as he listened, and Alicia's gaze flicked in that direction for the briefest moment, then returned forward, her expression unchanged, but her focus sharper now, more defined, like she was tracking something beneath the surface of the room, something that had not yet revealed itself to anyone else. And then, from somewhere deeper in the building, a door opened, footsteps, approaching, steady, purposeful, not rushed but not casual either, and the second officer looked up instinctively, his pen pausing mid-stroke, his attention shifting toward the hallway. While Alicia did not turn, not immediately, she simply stood there, waiting, her stillness now carrying a different weight, something quieter, something deliberate, like she was no longer reacting to the situation but anticipating it. And as the footsteps grew closer, echoing softly against the tile, one thing became clear in the subtle tightening of the room, the slight change in posture, the way attention shifted without anyone saying a word. Whatever was about to walk through that doorway was not part of the routine, not part of the script they thought they were following, and Alicia knew it before anyone else did. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway, and for a split second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, the low hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly louder, sharper, like they were the only thing still moving. And then the figure stepped into view, a man in a dark suit, not flashy, not loud, but precise, everything about him clean and deliberate, from the crease in his jacket to the way his eyes scanned the room without hurry. And he did not raise his voice, did not announce himself, but the effect was immediate. Conversations softened, movements slowed, attention shifted, as if something unseen had just taken control of the space without needing permission, and the second officer straightened slightly in his chair, setting his pen down with a small, almost unconscious motion. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone had already changed, less certain, more careful. And the man stepped forward just enough for the light to catch his face, calm, composed, his gaze steady as it moved from the desk to Alicia, pausing there for a fraction longer than anywhere else, not surprised, not alarmed, just confirming, like he had expected to find her exactly where she was. "I am looking for Alicia Carter," he said, his voice even, carrying just enough weight to quiet the last bits of background noise. And the first officer, the one who had brought her in, shifted his stance slightly, She is being processed, he replied, gesturing toward the desk. We found. But the man lifted a hand, not abruptly, not disrespectfully, just enough to pause the explanation before it could finish. Yes, he said softly. I am aware of what you believe you found. And that word, believe, hung there for a moment, subtle but sharp, like it had been placed with intention, and the second officer glanced between them, something tightening in his expression, something beginning to connect, though not fully formed yet. Sir, if you are here on her behalf, you will need to. But again, the man did not raise his voice, did not interrupt forcefully. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small leather wallet, opening it with a smooth, practiced motion and holding it just long enough for both officers to see. And whatever was inside it was enough, because the change was immediate, unmistakable, the second officer's posture shifting, his shoulders pulling back slightly, his eyes sharpening with a different kind of focus now, not suspicion, not confusion, but recognition. Understood, he said quietly. His tone completely altered, and the first officer frowned faintly, glancing between them. Wait, what is? But the second officer cut in, not harshly, but firmly. Give us a moment. And the room adjusted around that statement, like it had been waiting for direction, other officers turning away, conversations resuming at a lower volume, the tension redistributing itself into something quieter, more controlled, and Alicia, who had not moved through any of this, finally shifted her gaze, meeting the man's eyes fully now. And there was no surprise there, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement, like two pieces of the same plan recognizing each other in real time. You took your time, she said, her voice low, almost conversational, and the man's expression softened just slightly, not a smile, but close. Traffic, he replied, equally calm, and for a brief moment, the weight of the situation seemed to tilt, just enough to reveal that something deeper was at play, something that had been unfolding long before the patrol car ever pulled up, and the second officer cleared his throat lightly, glancing at the evidence bag still resting on the desk, then back at the man. Is there something we should know? He asked, and the man closed the wallet, slipping it back into his jacket with the same measured precision. There is, he said, his voice steady, but not here. And that was when Alicia exhaled, just once, the smallest release of tension, almost invisible, but real, and she stepped forward. Without being told, her movement smooth, deliberate, as if the direction of the next step had always been hers to choose, and the first officer watched her, his confusion now more visible, his earlier certainty beginning to fracture at the edges. Hold on, he said, not aggressive, just uncertain. She cannot just. But again, the second officer raised a hand, this time to him, mirroring the gesture from moments before. Let us pause, he said, quieter now, more controlled, his eyes still on Alicia, then shifting briefly to the hallway, as if he was beginning to understand that whatever was happening here extended far beyond the walls of this room. And Alicia did not look back as she moved, her steps steady, her posture unchanged, but something about her presence had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the weight of the room no longer pressed against her, but moved around her instead. And as the door to the inner hallway opened, the light from within spilling out in a narrow strip across the floor, one thing became clear in the silence that followed. The story they thought they were processing had already moved on without them, and they were only just starting to realize it. The hallway beyond the door felt different the moment Alicia stepped into it, quieter, more insulated, the kind of silence that did not come from emptiness but from control, where every sound had a place and every movement was measured. The overhead lights softer here, casting a steady glow across the polished floor that reflected their steps in faint, shifting patterns, and the man in the suit walked beside her without rushing, his pace matching hers exactly, not leading, not following, just aligned, while behind them, the door closed with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been, like a boundary sealing itself, and Alicia did not look back, did not hesitate, her gaze forward, her breathing even, as if this transition had always been part of the plan. And after a few steps, the man spoke, his voice low enough to stay within the space between them. You held longer than expected, he said, not as a question, but as an observation, and Alicia's eyes flicked briefly toward him, then forward again. He needed to feel comfortable, she replied, her tone calm, precise. If he rushed, we would not get the pattern, and the man nodded once, a small acknowledgement, like confirming a detail already understood, and they reached a door at the end of the hallway, plain, unmarked, but secured with a keypad that the man accessed without hesitation, entering a code with quick, practiced movements, the lock clicking open with a soft mechanical sound. And inside, the room was different again, larger, brighter, walls lined with screens that glowed with muted colors, maps, timestamps, fragments of video feeds paused mid-frame, each one capturing a moment that meant something more than it showed, and two other individuals stood inside, their attention shifting immediately as Alicia entered, one of them stepping forward, tablet in hand. We have him on 3 angles, she said, her voice controlled but carrying an edge of focus, store camera, exterior reflection, and partial from the traffic light feed across the street. And Alicia moved closer to the screens, her eyes scanning the images without lingering, absorbing the details quickly, efficiently, like she had already seen most of it before, just not all together. And on the center screen, the footage played silently. Ryan Whitmore standing near the display aisle, his posture relaxed, his movements subtle, calculated, his hand slipping briefly toward Alicia's bag when her back was turned, the motion small enough to be missed in real time, but clear now in slow replay, undeniable. And Alicia watched it without reaction, no anger, no surprise, just confirmation, and beside her, the man in the suit folded his arms loosely. He has done this before, he said, his gaze fixed on the screen. Not always the same method, but the same pattern. Control the narrative, create the evidence, step back before anyone looks too closely. And Alicia nodded slightly. He chooses targets that will not be believed, she added, her voice steady. And one of the agents at the console tapped the screen, pulling up another clip, a different location, different day, but the same man, the same posture, the same subtle reach. And for a moment, the room fell into a quiet that was heavier than before, not uncertain, but focused, like everything had just aligned into a clearer picture. And then Alicia stepped back, her eyes moving from the screens to the table in the center of the room, where a folder lay open. Documents neatly arranged, timelines marked, notes written in precise handwriting. And she placed her hand lightly on the edge of the table, grounding herself in the physical space for just a second, before speaking again. He thinks this ends tonight, she said, not looking at anyone in particular, and the man beside her tilted his head slightly. And it does not? He asked, and Alicia finally allowed herself the faintest shift in expression, not a smile, not quite, but something close, something that carried weight beneath its calm surface. No, she replied, her voice quiet but certain. Tonight is where it starts. And behind her, one of the screens flickered as a new feed came online, a different angle, a different moment. Ryan stepping into his car, his reflection caught in the glass for just a second before the door closed, and Alicia turned her gaze toward it, her focus sharpening again, because the man who had walked away thinking he was finished had just stepped directly into the next phase of something he had never seen coming. And in the stillness of that room, surrounded by light and quiet intention, the balance of power had already begun to shift, even if he had not felt it yet. The room settled into a quiet rhythm after the footage stopped, the soft hum of the monitors blending with the faint tapping of keys as one of the agents adjusted the timeline, dragging a marker back a few seconds, then forward again, isolating the exact moment Ryan's hand crossed into Alicia's space. And Alicia watched it once more, not because she needed confirmation, but because repetition revealed intention, and intention revealed pattern, and pattern was what mattered, always. And beside her, the man in the suit leaned slightly closer to the screen, his voice low, measured. He is careful, he said. He keeps his movements small, controlled, just enough to go unnoticed. And Alicia nodded once, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. He relies on assumption, she replied. He knows what people expect to see, and he gives them just enough to stop looking deeper. And one of the agents at the console turned in her chair, glancing between them. We ran his background again, she said, pulling up a file on the side screen. No prior charges, No official complaints that stuck, but there are patterns, civil disputes, dropped claims, witnesses who changed statements. And Alicia stepped closer, her gaze shifting to the data, absorbing the fragments, the inconsistencies, the quiet gaps that told more than the records themselves. He has been refining this, she said, almost to herself, each time cleaner than the last. And the man beside her crossed his arms loosely, which means he believes he cannot be caught. He added, and Alicia's expression did not change, but something in her posture sharpened, like a line being drawn just beneath the surface. Not caught, she corrected softly. Not challenged. And for a moment, the distinction hung in the air, subtle but important, and then she turned away from the screens, walking toward the far side of the room where a smaller monitor displayed a live traffic feed, the camera angle fixed on a stretch of road just outside the store. And there he was again, Ryan's car moving steadily through the evening traffic, brake lights flaring briefly as he slowed at an intersection, then easing forward again, blending into the flow like nothing about him stood out, like he was just another driver heading home after an ordinary day. And Alicia watched the movement, her focus steady, calculating. He is not done, she said, her voice quiet but certain, and the agent at the console glanced back. You think he will try again tonight? She asked, and Alicia shook her head slightly. Not the same way, she replied. But he will check the outcome, he always does. And the man in the suit stepped closer, his gaze following the car on the screen. You mean he will confirm she is processed, he said, and Alicia nodded once. He needs to see the result, she said. It is part of the control. And the room shifted subtly at that, the agents exchanging brief looks, understanding beginning to settle into action, and the man in the suit reached for the table, tapping once on the edge. A quiet signal that carried weight. Then we let him believe it, he said, and Alicia turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze, and for a moment, there was nothing but silent agreement, the kind that did not need explanation, because the next step had already formed between them, and behind them. One of the screens flickered again as a new data point appeared, a location ping, Ryan's car slowing near a familiar block, not far from the precinct, not far from where this had started, and Alicia's eyes moved to it immediately, her focus sharpening. There, she said, and the agent zoomed in, the image resolving into a clearer view, Ryan's car pulling to the curb, engine idling, his silhouette visible through the windshield, head tilted slightly, as if watching something just out of frame, and Alicia stepped closer, her reflection merging briefly with the image on the screen, her voice barely above a whisper. He is waiting, she said, and the man beside her nodded slowly. For confirmation, he added, and Alicia's gaze did not waver. No, she said softly, for control. And in that moment, the room seemed to tighten again, not with uncertainty, but with precision, every movement aligning, every decision narrowing toward a single point, because the man sitting in that car believed the story was already written, believed the outcome was already secured, and Alicia stood there, watching him through layers of glass and distance, knowing something he did not, something that had been building long before he ever stepped into that store, something that was about to turn everything he thought he understood into something else entirely. The image of Ryan's car remained steady on the screen, the glow of brake lights reflecting faintly off the pavement as the engine idled in place. And inside the room, no one spoke for a moment, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been understood, the pieces aligning in silence before action followed. And Alicia stood just inches from the monitor, her eyes fixed on the shape of him behind the glass. His posture relaxed, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, the other near his phone, waiting, always waiting, and she could almost feel the rhythm of his thinking from here, the expectation, the quiet confidence that came from believing the outcome was already secured, and behind her, the man in the suit shifted slightly, his voice low but clear. If he is watching for confirmation, we give it to him, he said, and one of the agents turned in her chair, fingers already moving across the keyboard. We can push the booking status through the system, she replied. Make it visible, time-stamped, processed intake. And Alicia did not look away from the screen as she spoke. Not just visible, she said. Believable. And the agent nodded once, adjusting the sequence, aligning the digital trail with precision. Every entry placed where it would be expected, every detail matching the story Ryan believed he had created, and within seconds, the system updated, a quiet shift in data that carried far more weight than it appeared, and on the screen, Ryan's silhouette moved slightly, his head tilting down toward his phone, the glow illuminating his face just enough to reveal the change, subtle but there. The smallest release of tension, like a box had been checked, like the last piece of his plan had fallen into place, and Alicia watched it happen in real time, her expression unchanged, but her focus sharpening, because this was the moment that mattered, not the setup, not the accusation, but the confirmation, the instant where certainty replaced caution, and beside her, the man in the suit exhaled quietly. "He believes it," he said, and Alicia nodded once, her voice barely above a whisper. "He always does." And across the room, another screen flickered as a secondary feed came online. A closer angle now, traffic camera zoomed in just enough to capture the details. Ryan's face clearer, his posture easing back into the seat, his hand lifting briefly as he adjusted the rearview mirror, checking, always checking, and then his fingers tapped once against the steering wheel, a small, unconscious motion, but telling, like a signal to himself that everything was under control, and Alicia stepped back slightly, her eyes moving from one screen to the next, tracking the sequence, the timing, the pattern that had repeated itself more times than anyone had documented, until now. And one of the agents spoke again, her tone quieter, more focused. "If he leaves now, we lose the extended window," she said. "We need him to move into the next step." And Alicia turned her head just enough to acknowledge the statement, her gaze thoughtful, measured. "He will not leave immediately," she replied. "He will linger, just long enough to feel secure, just long enough to believe there is no risk." And as if on cue, Ryan's car remained where it was, the engine still running, the lights still on, his presence anchored in that exact spot, waiting not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because control was not just about action, it was about certainty, about seeing the result with his own eyes, even if indirectly. And Alicia watched him, her reflection, faint in the screen, merging with the image of the man who believed he was in control of everything unfolding around him. And then she spoke again, her voice steady, precise. "We move now." And the room responded instantly, not with noise, but with motion, agents shifting positions, screens updating, signals being sent through channels unseen, each step coordinated, deliberate, and the man in the suit nodded once, his gaze still on the screen. "You are sure?" he asked, not doubting, just confirming, and Alicia's eyes did not waver as she answered. He crossed the line the moment he stopped watching for risk and started expecting control, she said, and outside, on the screen, Ryan finally reached for the gear shift, his hand steady, his movement confident, the car easing forward from the curb, merging back into traffic, unaware that the moment he chose to move was the moment everything shifted. And inside the room, Alicia turned away from the screen, her posture straight, her expression calm, but beneath it, something had locked into place, something final, because the man who thought he was leaving the scene had just stepped fully into the part of the story he could not see. And for the first time since this began, the direction of what came next belonged entirely to her. The city moved around him in a steady flow of headlights and passing shadows, Ryan's car slipping back into traffic like it had never stopped, like the moment at the curb had already faded into something insignificant, and inside the vehicle, his grip on the steering wheel loosened just slightly, the tension that had held his shoulders tight beginning to dissolve into something quieter, something closer to satisfaction. And he glanced once at his phone again, the screen still lit with the confirmation he had been waiting for, the official entry, the processed status. Everything exactly where it should be, and he let out a slow breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. More like a release, like a calculation completed, and he turned onto a wider street, the lanes opening up, traffic thinning just enough to give him space. And for a moment, everything felt simple again, predictable, controlled, just the way he preferred it, and several blocks away, inside the operations room, the movement had already begun. Agents shifting positions with quiet precision, screens updating in real time, each feed tracking his location as he moved through the grid of the city, his car marked not by a flashing signal, but by a pattern, a trajectory that had been mapped long before he realized he was part of it. And Alicia stood near the center of the room, her gaze moving between the displays, absorbing the changes as they happened, her posture steady, her presence anchoring the motion around her. And the man in the suit stepped closer, his voice low, controlled. "He is heading north," he said, nodding toward the screen. And Alicia followed the line of movement, the path forming in her mind before the system finished drawing it. "He is going somewhere familiar," she replied, her tone thoughtful but certain, and one of the agents pulled up a layered map, overlays sliding into place, known locations, previous stops, patterns that had taken weeks to build, and there it was, a cluster, a point of repetition, not obvious at first glance, but clear once you knew what to look for, and Alicia's eyes settled on it immediately. "He returns to the same area after each incident," she said. "Not the same address, but the same radius," and the agent nodded, zooming in further. "Within 2 miles every time," she confirmed, and the man in the suit crossed his arms loosely, his gaze narrowing slightly. "A comfort zone," he said, and Alicia shook her head just once. "A control zone," she corrected, and on the screen, Ryan's car slowed again, the brake lights flaring as he approached another intersection, then turned, the path shifting slightly but still within that invisible boundary, and Alicia watched the movement with quiet focus, her mind already several steps ahead. "He believes distance protects him," she said. "Not too close to the event, not too far to lose awareness." And behind her, one of the agents spoke up, her voice steady but carrying a note of urgency. "If he reaches that zone, we will need to adjust the perimeter," she said, and Alicia turned slightly, acknowledging the point. "We will not adjust," she replied. "We will follow." And the room stilled for just a fraction of a second, the difference settling in, subtle but important, because following meant something else entirely, something more controlled, more intentional, and the man beside her gave a small nod, understanding, passing between them without the need for further explanation. And on the screen, Ryan's car finally pulled into a quieter street, lined with low buildings and dimly lit storefronts, the kind of place that looked ordinary enough to be overlooked, and he slowed again, easing toward the curb, the engine idling as he came to a stop, and for a moment, nothing happened, no sudden movement, no urgency, just stillness, like he was deciding what came next, and inside the operations room, every eye was on the screen. Every movement paused in anticipation, and Alicia stepped closer, her reflection faint against the glass, her voice low, almost a whisper. "This is where he resets," she said, and the man in the suit glanced at her. "Resets for what?" he asked, and Alicia's gaze did not leave the screen as she answered. "For the next move," she said, and outside, Ryan reached for his phone again, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable from this distance, but his behavior unmistakable, methodical, controlled, like he was not reacting to what had happened, but preparing for what would come next. And Alicia watched him, her focus unbroken, because this was the part he thought no one could see, the quiet moment between actions where the pattern revealed itself, and in that silence, in that stillness, the difference between control and exposure began to close, even if he had not realized it yet. The car remained still at the curb, engine humming softly beneath the hood, a low vibration that blended into the quiet of the street, and Ryan sat there for a moment longer than necessary, his fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed ahead but unfocused, like he was not looking at the street itself, but at something playing out behind his eyes, replaying, confirming, refining, and then slowly, almost casually, he reached for his phone again, unlocking it with a practiced motion, his thumb moving across the screen with the kind of confidence that came from repetition, from knowing exactly what he expected to see. And inside the operations room, every movement on that screen was mirrored in silence. Alicia standing still, her eyes locked onto the feed, watching not just what he did, but how he did it, the timing, the pauses, the subtle shifts in posture that revealed more than the actions themselves. And beside her, one of the agents leaned slightly forward, voice low, controlled. "He is checking the system again," she said, and Alicia gave the faintest nod, her attention unbroken, because this was the layer beneath the obvious, the part most people missed, the need for repetition, for reassurance, for control to be confirmed more than once. And on the screen, Ryan's expression shifted just slightly, the corners of his mouth tightening, not into a smile, but into something close, something satisfied, and he leaned back into the seat, exhaling slowly, his shoulders loosening, and for a moment he looked almost relaxed, like the weight of whatever calculation he had been carrying had finally lifted. And Alicia watched that change with a quiet intensity, because that was the moment, the exact point where caution dropped just enough to create an opening. And she spoke, her voice steady, precise. "This is where he makes the mistake." And the man in the suit glanced at her, his brow lowering slightly. "What mistake?" he asked. And Alicia did not look at him as she answered. "He believes the story is complete," she said, and behind them, one of the screens shifted again, a new data stream appearing, pulling in information from a different source, a pattern overlay that traced Ryan's previous movements across multiple days, multiple locations, lines intersecting in ways that were not obvious at first glance, but clear once aligned. And Alicia stepped closer, her eyes scanning the intersections, the repeated stops, the consistent timing. And then she reached out, pointing lightly at the screen. "Here," she said, her voice quiet but firm, and the agent at the console zoomed in, isolating the point. A small building, unremarkable from the outside, just another part of the city that people passed without noticing. And yet it appeared again and again in the data, always after, always at the same stage, and the man beside her studied it for a moment. "What is it?" he asked, and Alicia's gaze did not waver. "It is where he resets his narrative," she replied, and the room stilled slightly at that, the meaning settling in, deeper than the words themselves. And on the screen, Ryan shifted again, his hand moving to the door handle, pausing there for just a second before opening it, stepping out onto the sidewalk, his movements smooth, unhurried, like he had nowhere pressing to be, like this was just another stop in an ordinary evening. And the camera angle caught him briefly in profile, his expression composed, controlled, the same quiet confidence still present. And Alicia watched him step away from the car, her focus narrowing, because this was no longer about what had happened, it was about what he would do next. And behind her, the man in the suit spoke again, his tone lower now, more focused. "If this is his pattern, we take him here," he said. And Alicia finally turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time since the car had stopped, and there was something different in her expression now, something more defined, more certain. "No," she said softly, and the word landed with more weight than its volume suggested, and the man's brow furrowed slightly. "No," he repeated, and Alicia looked back at the screen, at Ryan moving toward the building, at the pattern unfolding exactly as expected, and she spoke again, her voice calm, but carrying a quiet finality. "We let him walk in," she said. And for a moment, no one in the room moved, because they understood what that meant. Not just observation, not just confirmation, but patience, control, letting the pattern complete itself so that when it was interrupted, it could not be denied. And on the screen, Ryan reached the door, his hand lifting to push it open, and Alicia watched that single motion with absolute focus, because everything that came next depended on what happened after that door closed behind him. And for the first time since this began, the outcome was no longer just being observed, it was being shaped, one deliberate moment at a time. The door closed behind Ryan with a soft, unremarkable click, the kind of sound that barely registered unless you were listening for it. And inside the operations room, that single moment landed heavier than anything that had come before it, because it marked the transition from observation to inevitability. And Alicia did not move right away, her eyes fixed on the now static image of the entrance, the camera feed holding on the empty doorway as if waiting for something to return. And for a brief second, the room held its breath again, not out of uncertainty, but out of precision, because timing mattered now more than anything else. And then Alicia spoke, her voice low, controlled. "Lock the perimeter grid," she said, and the response was immediate. Agents shifting into motion, fingers moving across keyboards, screens updating in rapid succession, layers of data sliding into place like pieces of a structure that had been waiting to be assembled. And the man in the suit stepped closer to the central display, his gaze steady. "We have interior coverage," he asked, and one of the agents nodded, pulling up a secondary feed, grainier, less defined, but enough to see movement, enough to confirm presence. And there he was again, Ryan, inside now, his figure moving through the narrow interior of the building, his posture relaxed, unaware, his attention focused inward, like he had stepped into a space that belonged to him. And Alicia watched the feed without blinking, her focus absolute, because this was the part no one had seen before, the part that had remained hidden behind patterns and assumptions. And now it was unfolding in real time, and the agent at the console spoke again, her tone sharper now. "We are picking up signals inside, multiple devices, all connected through the same local network," she said, and Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly. "He is not working alone," she said, not as a question, but as a confirmation, and the man beside her gave a small nod. "We expected as much," he replied, and the screen shifted again, zooming slightly, capturing Ryan as he moved deeper into the building, his hand brushing briefly against the wall as he turned a corner, his movements familiar, practiced, like he had walked this path many times before. And Alicia stepped closer, her voice steady. "Mark every interaction point," she said, and the agents responded instantly, tagging moments, tracking movement, building a live map of his path inside the structure. And for a moment, everything aligned into a clear pattern, the same rhythm, the same sequence, the same controlled steps that had defined everything he had done up to this point. And then something changed, subtle at first, almost easy to miss. Ryan slowed, his posture shifting slightly, his head turning just a fraction more than before, like he was listening, like something had caught his attention that was not part of the routine, and Alicia saw it immediately, her voice cutting through the room, quiet but sharp. "Pause," she said, and the agents froze their inputs, the room tightening again around that single word. And on the screen, Ryan stood still for just a second longer than expected, his hand hovering near his side, his expression unreadable from the angle, but his body language different now, less certain, less fluid, like something in the environment had shifted just enough to register. And the man in the suit leaned slightly forward, his voice lower now, more focused. "Does he know?" he asked. And Alicia did not answer right away, her eyes locked on the screen, analyzing the smallest details, the timing, the hesitation, the subtle break in pattern. And then she spoke, her voice calm but precise. "No," she said, "but he feels it." And that distinction settled into the room like a weight, because feeling something was often the first step before understanding it, and understanding led to reaction, and reaction could disrupt everything if not controlled. And Alicia's posture shifted just slightly, her focus sharpening even further. "We move the timeline forward," she said, and the agent at the console hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "That accelerates exposure," she replied, and Alicia nodded once. "Exactly," she said, and the man beside her exhaled slowly. The decision clear now, the path set, and on the screen, Ryan began to move again, slower this time, more deliberate, his steps measured in a way they had not been before, like the certainty that had carried him into the building was no longer fully intact. And Alicia watched him, her expression unchanged, but beneath it, everything had shifted, because this was the moment where control began to fracture, not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, quietly, where the man who believed he understood the game started to realize there were pieces he had never seen. And as the feeds continued to update, the data aligning, the pattern tightening around him, one thing became clear to everyone in that room. The story had reached the point where it could no longer return to what it was, and Ryan, for the first time since this began, was no longer ahead of it. Ryan stopped again, but this time it was not the controlled pause of someone following a routine. It was slower, heavier, like his body had decided something before his mind could fully explain it. And the hallway around him felt different now. The air no longer neutral, no longer invisible, but present, pressing in just enough to be noticed. And he turned his head slightly, his eyes scanning the space behind him, then ahead again, not searching for anything specific, just reacting to a shift he could not name. And inside the operations room, Alicia saw it instantly, the change in cadence, the break in rhythm, the subtle misalignment between intention and movement, and her voice came quiet but precise. "He is aware of something," she said, and the man beside her nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the screen. Instinct, he replied, and Alicia did not look away. Instinct is what kept him safe, she said. But it is also what makes him predictable, and the agents around them adjusted. Their positions, their movements quieter now, more deliberate, because this was no longer about gathering information, it was about controlling what came next, and on the screen, Ryan took another step forward, slower than before, his hand brushing lightly against the wall again. But this time not out of habit, out of grounding, like he was anchoring himself to something physical, something real, and his breathing shifted, just slightly, not visible, but implied in the timing of his movement. The pause between steps, the hesitation that had not been there before, and Alicia stepped closer to the central display, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "He is recalibrating," she said, and one of the agents glanced up from the console. "Do we pull now?" she asked, her tone controlled but carrying urgency, and Alicia shook her head once, her answer immediate. "No," she said. "If we move now, he retreats." And the room absorbed that, the logic settling in, because retreat meant distance. And distance meant loss of control, and Alicia's gaze remained fixed on the screen as she continued. "We let him think he is still ahead," she said, and the man in the suit exhaled. Slowly, understanding the balance they were holding. "That line is narrowing," he said, and Alicia nodded slightly. "That is the point," she replied. And on the screen, Ryan reached the end of the hallway, a door in front of him, plain, unmarked, just like the one he had entered, and he paused again, his hand hovering near the handle, not touching it yet, just close enough to show intent, and for a moment, everything stilled, his posture, the air around him, the movement of the feet itself, like time had slowed just enough to stretch the decision into something visible, and Alicia watched that hesitation with absolute focus. Because this was the moment where instinct either reinforced the pattern or broke it, and if it broke, everything shifted, and behind her, one of the agents spoke again, quieter now. "If he turns back," she began, and Alicia finished the thought without looking away. "Then we adjust," she said, her voice steady, but there was something deeper beneath it now. Something sharper, because adjustment meant exposure, meant moving the operation into a different phase, and that carried risk. Not of failure, but of timing, and timing was everything. And on the screen, Ryan's hand finally moved, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance to the handle, his fingers wrapping around it with just enough pressure to commit, and Alicia's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her focus tightening. Because commitment meant continuation, and continuation meant the pattern was still intact, and the man beside her leaned slightly forward, his voice low. "He is going through," he said, and Alicia did not respond, because she already knew, and the door on the screen opened inward, revealing a darker space beyond, less defined, less visible, and Ryan stepped forward, crossing the threshold with a movement that was no longer as confident as before, but still controlled, still deliberate. And as the door began to close behind him, Alicia finally spoke again, her voice calm, but carrying a quiet finality. "Now he is inside the truth," she said, and the words settled into the room like a line drawn in place, because everything that had been constructed, every layer of control he believed he held, every assumption he had relied on, had just led him directly into the one space where none of it applied, and for the first time since this began, the advantage was no longer something being built, it was something already fully in place, waiting for him to realize it. The door closed behind Ryan with a softer sound than before, almost absorbed by the darkness of the room he had stepped into. And for a moment, everything around him felt muted, the hallway gone, the outside world sealed off, replaced by a space that seemed to hold its own kind of silence, heavier, more deliberate, and he stopped just inside, his eyes adjusting slowly to the dim light, shapes beginning to form along the edges of the room, outlines of tables, equipment, shadows that did not immediately reveal their purpose, and his posture shifted again, not dramatically, but enough, his shoulders no longer fully relaxed, his breathing slightly more measured, like something beneath the surface had begun to register, something that did not align with what he expected, and inside the operations room, the feed had changed, the angle tighter now, interior sensors picking up just enough detail to follow his movement. And Alicia stood completely still, her gaze fixed on the screen, her expression calm but sharpened, because this was the moment where perception and reality began to separate, and beside her, the man in the suit spoke quietly. "He is hesitating," he said, and Alicia gave a faint nod, her voice low. "He is comparing," she replied, "what he expected against what is here." And on the screen, Ryan took a step forward, slower than before, his eyes moving across the room, scanning, analyzing, trying to place what fell off without yet knowing why, and his hand moved slightly away from his side, not reaching for anything, just adjusting, like his body was preparing for something his mind had not fully defined. And Alicia watched every detail, every fraction of a second, because this was where control dissolved, not in a single moment, but in layers, each one peeling back as certainty gave way to doubt. And one of the agents at the console leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is not following the pattern anymore," she said, and Alicia responded without looking away. "The pattern brought him here," she said. "Now he has to face what is beyond it." And the room held that line in silence, the weight of it settling across every screen, every movement. And on the feed, Ryan turned slightly, his gaze catching something just out of frame, his head tilting, his posture tightening just enough to show that whatever he saw did not belong to the version of this place he had built in his mind. And Alicia stepped forward, just one step, her presence anchoring the moment, her voice steady. "Bring up the full overlay," she said, and the agents responded instantly, the screen shifting, data layering over the live feed, markers appearing, points of connection illuminating the space around him, invisible lines. Now visible, the structure of the operation revealing itself not to him, but to those watching, and the man beside her exhaled slowly. "He is inside it," he said, and Alicia's eyes did not move. "He has been inside it from the beginning," she replied, and on the screen, Ryan's movement slowed again, his steps no longer confident, no longer controlled, but cautious, measured in a way that had not existed before. And he stopped once more, fully this time, his body still, his gaze fixed ahead, and, for a moment, everything aligned into a single point of realization, not spoken, not confirmed, but felt, the shift from control to exposure, from certainty to awareness. And Alicia saw it, not in his face, not in any obvious gesture, but in the absence of movement, in the way he no longer advanced, no longer adjusted, just stood there, processing. And she spoke again, her voice quiet but final. "He understands now," she said, and the room remained still, because understanding changed everything. It marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another, and the man in the suit turned slightly toward her, his expression more focused than before. "Then we move to the final step," he said, and Alicia nodded once, her gaze still locked on the screen. "Yes," she replied. "Now he sees the truth." And on the feed, Ryan remained where he was, the stillness around him no longer empty, but full, filled with everything he had not seen, everything he had not accounted for, and for the first time since this began, the control he believed he held was no longer something he could return to, because it had already been replaced by something else entirely, something that had been waiting for him all along. Ryan did not move for several seconds, and in that stillness, something invisible shifted completely, not in the room itself, but inside him, the quiet certainty that had carried him through every step until now dissolving into something heavier, something that did not have a clear shape. And his eyes moved again, slower this time, not scanning with confidence, but searching with intention, trying to understand how the space around him no longer matched the version he had built in his mind. And the silence pressed in, not empty, but full, filled with presence he could not see. And inside the operations room, no one spoke, because this was the moment that did not need words, the moment where realization completed itself without explanation. And Alicia stood at the center of it all, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, but something in her expression had softened, not in emotion, but in certainty, because the outcome was no longer a question, it was simply unfolding. And beside her, the man in the suit exhaled slowly, his voice low. "He knows," he said, and Alicia gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "He understands enough," she replied. and that is all it takes. And on the screen, Ryan finally shifted, his shoulders lowering slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance of something he could not control, and he took a step forward, then stopped again, not because he was unsure, but because the purpose of moving had changed, the pattern he had relied on no longer guiding him, and for the first time, his actions were no longer calculated, they were reactive, and Alicia watched that transition with quiet focus, because that was the true reversal, not the evidence, not the structure, but the shift from control to response, from author of the story to participant within it. And she spoke, her voice calm, grounded. "Bring the final layer online," she said, and the agents responded instantly, the screens adjusting once more, the full scope of the operation aligning into a single view. Every angle, every data point, every moment connected into a narrative that could not be altered, and the man beside her glanced at the display, then back at her. "This is it," he said, and Alicia's gaze remained on the screen. "It always was," she replied, and on the feed, Ryan's head lifted slightly, his eyes focusing on something directly in front of him, something just beyond the edge of the visible frame, and though the camera did not show what he saw, the effect was unmistakable, the final piece, the one detail that made everything else clear, and his posture stilled completely, not tense, not rigid, just still, like the moment had finally caught up to him, and Alicia watched in silence, because there was nothing left to guide, nothing left to control, only the outcome revealing itself exactly as it had been designed to. And after a few seconds, she turned away from the screen, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a quiet shift, her focus moving from the image to the room itself, to the people who had watched it unfold, and the man in the suit studied her for a moment. "You are done?" he asked, and Alicia nodded once, her expression calm, steady. "Yes," she said, and the simplicity of that word carried more weight than anything else that had been spoken, because it marked the end of something that had taken time, precision, and patience to build. And she stepped back from the display, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her breathing even, unchanged, and the room began to move again, not with urgency, but with resolution, agents returning to their stations, systems updating, the operation shifting into its final phase without needing to be announced. And Alicia walked toward the door, her steps measured, unhurried, the same calm presence she had carried from the beginning still intact. And as she reached the threshold, she paused for just a fraction of a second, not to look back, but to let the moment settle, to allow the silence to complete what words never needed to explain. And then she stepped through, the door closing softly behind her, leaving the glow of the screens and the quiet hum of the room fading into the background. And outside, the night air felt cooler, clearer, the city moving as it always did, unaware of what had just shifted within it. And Alicia walked forward without hesitation, her figure blending into the rhythm of the street. And somewhere behind her, in a room filled with light and truth, a man stood still for the first time in a long time, no longer controlling the story, but finally understanding it. And Alicia did not look back, because she never needed to.